10 months into the pandemic, the UK has passed another grim milestone, with the number of people dying within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test now over 80,000. The figure was released as scientists advising the government warned of the need for even stricter lockdown measures than in March, because the new variant of the virus is much more infectious. As the vaccine continues to be rolled out for vulnerable groups, Buckingham Palace made it publicly known that the Queen and Prince Philip have been vaccinated. Here's our health correspondent, Katharine Da Costa.
1, 2, 3.
Another dark day in this pandemic, and still the pressure builds for those on the front line. Hospitals across the country are treating 50% more COVID patients now than during the first peak in April. And with 4,000 new admissions today, NHS staff say this year's winter pressure is off the charts.
It really is unprecedented in terms of the numbers of patients that require intensive care being put on a ventilator at one time. Most hospitals have expanded their intensive care capacity to somewhere in the region of 3 times their normal capacity.
Some trusts are urgently trying to discharge patients to free up extra beds. This hotel in South London's working with King's College Hospital, providing a stopgap for homeless or vulnerable patients while they wait for emergency housing.
Once more, we must all stay home.
A simple, clear message in this new government campaign, reinforcing just how critical it is to keep your distance, wear a mask, wash your hands and ventilate indoor spaces. Because even with the UK-wide lockdowns, experts warn the new variant spreads more easily, which is likely to make the virus much harder to control.
The sorts of transmission that perhaps we were seeing during lockdowns last year, that level of transmission will now be 40 or 50% higher. So we're going to have to work that much harder to achieve the same effect.
So the race is on to protect the most vulnerable. This, the home of Bristol City Football Club, now one of 7 mass COVID vaccination centres in England. From Monday, trained volunteers will begin offering immunisations, joining hundreds of GP sites and hospital hubs around the country.
They have been working genuinely day and night, and they're working all through weekends as well to make sure that their populations get vaccinated. And it's not like flu clinics. This has been hugely complex.
Today, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, both in their 90s, received their first doses at Windsor Castle. Vaccinations will eventually help to relieve pressure on the health service, but with new infections still at record levels, hospital admissions and deaths are expected to continue rising for several weeks to come. Katharine Da Costa, BBC News.
Well, let's look now at the latest government figures in detail. There were 59,937 new coronavirus cases recorded in the latest 24-hour period. The average number of new cases reported per day in the last week is now 59,660. There were on average 29,630 COVID-19 patients in hospital in the last week. And there were 1,035 deaths. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. It means on average in the past week, 894 deaths were announced every day. And it takes the total number of deaths so far across the UK to 80,868. Under the national lockdown, people in England must stay at home and only go out for essential reasons. And there are similar measures in place across most of Scotland, in Wales and in Northern Ireland. But the guidance in England has come under scrutiny, as Derbyshire police said they would review their decision to issue £200 fines to 2 women who drove 5 miles for a walk. Jon Donnison reports.
The pandemic may be yet to peak, but on a beautiful winter's day, London's parks were busy. A stroll and a coffee, as good as entertainment gets for many in these challenging times. But is the government's message to stay home being heard?
It does feel very different to the first lockdown, where everything was sort of closed and quiet.
Yeah.
So
I think in general it feels the vibe is different. I think people are kind of a little bit over it now. I don't know. That's what I feel like. As in, I get the vibe that it's less restrictive.
I'm happy with the rules, and I know it's for the better, for the good of the population.
I'm not sure what more they could restrict from people's lives realistically.
But are even tougher restrictions needed?
Some scientists say the vast majority of people are actually sticking to the rules. The problem, they say, is that the lockdown is still too lax. In particular, too many people, they say, are categorised as critical workers, meaning schools and public transport are still busy.
In Snowdonia, hikers have been turned away after the authorities closed the car parks. UK government sources say there will be more focus on getting the police to enforce existing lockdown restrictions. But some scientists, including those advising the government, say it's the wrong approach.
They're not providing the kind of support that's needed for people to feel that they're able to do the sorts of things that the government is now saying, well, we're going to punish you if you don't do it. So they've got it all the wrong way round. It's really much, much more about support.
And in a long winter, with things almost certain to get worse before they get better, people may well need it. Jon Donnison, BBC News.
Political correspondent Iain Watson is here with me. And Iain, Downing Street is going to try to reinforce this stay-at-home message, isn't it, in the coming days?
It is, because the Prime Minister certainly thinks, Reeta, that the situation is more serious, more stark than it was in the spring during the first lockdown. And we've just heard, of course, more than 80,000 people have died. But also, actually, the number of people who've had a positive COVID test has now exceeded 3 million since the pandemic begun. Now, basically, Downing Street isn't looking to impose more restrictions, despite what some scientists are calling for, but they are worried about compliance. So yes, we are going to go those public campaigns, reinforcing the stay-at-home message, but there is also going to be a tougher line on enforcement. And tonight, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said the police will not hesitate to act against rule breakers. And I'm told what she's actually looking for them to do is to move much more quickly from engaging with the public, from explaining, to actually issuing fines, issuing penalties. But there'll be no new powers for the police. They won't be allowed to, for example, enter people's homes. And there is still some confusion over exactly what you can and can't do. So, for example, government guidance would say that you can travel a short distance if necessary for exercise. But this is not written into law. There's no precise definition in law, and some rank-and-file police officers today have been calling for far more clarity.
OK. Iain, many thanks. Our political correspondent Iain Watson there.